Melanie, welcome to Lessons from a Podcaster. How are you?
I'm doing very well today. How are you?
I'm also doing really, really well. I'm excited for this conversation. And to get things started, let's do the pitch challenge. So, someone, reaches out to you in a party or, in the elevator and they ask you, what is your podcast about? And what would you answer?
I would say my podcast is Empowered Presence, and it is a podcast all about how to build your visibility and thought leadership and authority as a woman of color without sacrificing authenticity. So basically, we help people to build their brands beyond the 9 to 5.
Very interesting. And when did you start this project?
Ooh, I started not that long ago. I think I started summer of 2023. So maybe
It's
about
new.
6 months. Very new. Yeah.
How is it going? Are you happy with it?
It's going okay. I definitely want and need more listeners.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Definitely could do a better job of like promoting it and putting it out there. But I also have a business. So it's like, I need some more support to get the podcast out there more, but I'm definitely enjoying the process.
Why did you decide to start this pod?
I started the podcast because I love speaking and teaching. And what I found was that, when working with clients, I realized a lot of my clients have similar situations and similar challenges. And I thought, you know what, if I could get my message out there while sharing stories of other women who have the same struggles, this would be great. So I felt like a podcast would be the perfect opportunity to achieve that.
I would love to learn more about like the struggles that your guests have. Is there like a particular story or interesting interview that you'd like to share with us?
Ooh, let's see. I actually had interviewed a guest yesterday. And she was talking she's actually one of my clients as well. So that was, nice. But she was talking about how she was doing very well for herself. She had built her brand, especially on LinkedIn. I talk a lot about LinkedIn as well. And so she had, 200,000 followers on LinkedIn, got LinkedIn top voice. And then she had some personal issues happen to her, big issues. And so she kind of wasn't able to show up the way she was before. And it really took a toll on her confidence. And so when it was time to get back out, it was like she was starting from scratch, and she really had to struggle to find her voice again and to find her confidence and to, not be so insecure because she felt like people knew what she was going through because she knew what she was going through.
Yeah.
And I felt like a lot of people have that same resistance to showing up because they feel like people are judging them and they feel like people are analyzing and looking deeper into things when it's all in our head. So I think that's a big struggle that a lot of us face. And the fact that she was able to tell her stories, so authentically was very, very powerful.
And it's also the problem with, or a little bit, the setback of personal branding, which is it's personal and it depends on you, right? So if for some reason you cannot perform, you cannot tweet or post or Insta, whatever, then you lose a little bit that visibility, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's, we have so much pressure to always show up and always be on and constantly be posting, but social media is toxic. Okay.
Yeah.
It can become a lot. And so I definitely advocate for taking breaks. I'm a big social media break person. And, if it means losing your sanity just for some likes or, you know what I mean? It's not worth it. Is it really worth it? It's not worth it. So I
don't think losing your sanity is worth it for sure. My question is though, how do you do that? Right? Because when you really depend on your brand, it becomes really hard to stop.
Yes, it's very true because you do lose that traction and the algorithm notices and your audience is like, But I also feel like there's things you could do to still appear present when you're actually not necessarily in the mix. So you can have systems in place so your posts are scheduled right? You can have a team or someone that to support you in terms of creating content if they know your voice well enough. You can have
Mm-hmm.
a team or a virtual assistant, for example, kind of comment on your behalf. It's not ideal, right? Because it's not
Mm-hmm.
you, but I think it alleviates a little bit of the, this
Mm-hmm.
person's missing. Where is she? She's all the way
Yeah.
gone. So you could do things like that. And then you could scale back a little bit too. So if you're used to
Mm-hmm.
posting 7 days a week, maybe scale it back to 3 or 4 days a week. So you're not completely
Mm-hmm.
missing, but you show up, you post something, and then you deal with real life. And then when you are able to jump back in, it's not like you're coming back out of nowhere and you have to reintroduce yourself to the world.
Totally. Is that something that people should be aware, even when they are starting out, that they might set up, processes that if they need to take a break, they can?
Yes, I think that's so important. And I think it's something that we really don't think about, right? When we're
No,
starting
yeah.
out, we want to do all the things because we're excited and we're like, okay, I got to do this and I have to do this and I have to do everything. And it's like, well, that's fine for now, but it's not scalable. It's not practical for you to continue to do everything all the time. So I think it's very important for you to consider putting systems in place before you need the system. Right? Because when it's time that you need the system, now you're scrambling, now you're all over the place and you're still trying to do
it's too late already.
Yeah, it's already it's too much. So I think if we were able to think about it like, okay, let me look at my week. Could I do this on a grander scale? If I double, triple, 10x my workload or volume, will it still work? If the answer is no, you need a system. So starting out, I think, is the best time for you to try to set up systems ahead of time.
And let's talk a little bit about setting up and finding a voice. Finding your brand, finding your voice, because that's crucial, right? Like people, they will listen to you, they will follow because of the content, of course, but as well a lot because of the personality, right? How can someone find their own voice, their own personality, their own brand, and share it with the world?
I love this question because I think that is really the root of the work that I do as a personal brand consultant. Because when people come to me and they're like, oh, I want to build my brand, the first they're thinking about content, colors or logos, and it's like, okay, we'll get there, but let's first determine, who are you? Right? A lot of my work and coaching is centered around identity. Because so many times we don't focus in and appreciate and slow down and recognize who we are. And a lot of times we let the world shape who we are, right? Because we feel like, well, I have to show up this way because that's what they expect, right? Your parents told you better not, speak unless spoken to. And all of these things are playing into who we are. And it's really not who we are. All those things are what other people say that we should be. And I think taking a step back and really asking yourself some deep questions about what your values are, what you are focused on, what you appreciate about the work that you do or the people that you're serving, who do you want to impact? What's the impact you want to make? What are your strengths? What are your perceived weaknesses? Right? I say perceived because what I found was my weakness that I thought was a weakness was really a differentiator for me, right? And embracing
what was that?
Those things.
What was the weakness?
So for me, funny enough, my weakness was I felt like I was not articulate enough, right? I felt like I didn't use big enough words and I wasn't as professional and buttoned up and poised enough. And so I was putting on an act, right? I would come to my calls because before I was doing this, I was a resume writer for 13 years and I had executive clients, right? And so I would show up to the calls and act like I was, right? That's not who I was. And over time, that just had to fade away. I couldn't put up the facade. And what ended up happening was people started saying, oh my gosh, I love your personality. You're so relatable. You're so funny, and it was like, oh, it's something about you. I really, I'm drawn to you. It was because I was showing up as who I was. And so the weakness of not using the big words was really a hindrance. I didn't need to use the big words. I just needed to
Yeah.
show up as who I was. And so I think that, finding your voice is really about figuring out who you are and embracing who you are.
Wow. Yeah. I think that summarizes it really well, finding who you are. And so you would what, like, try to figure out, like, hey, I need to use this word and that word, and executive. They.
You know what I was doing? I was just impersonating people that I, would listen to or hear in meetings and stuff. I was just mimicking, the verbiage that they were using when that wasn't part of my vocabulary.
Yeah.
It's just
So in
not,
your day to day, you normally, with your friends, with your family, you would be one person, and then with your clients, you'd be a different person.
Yes, and that's exhausting.
Okay. And do you think a lot of people do that?
I would say a lot of people of color do that. I can't speak for a lot, but that's why I focus in on women of color, because I feel like we tend to have that stigma around, you know what I mean, using certain verbiage and things like that, because the places that we typically operate we're usually the only one that look like us in the room. And so we feel the need to assimilate, and it's a bigger issue for us than, maybe someone else. So a lot of people of color tend to do it. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's something that we are doing on purpose per se. It's almost a lot of times it's a subconscious thing just to feel like we fit in.
Right. So you didn't even notice. At first, you were doing this and you didn't notice you were doing it. Is that it?
Well, and it didn't start in business, right? So it started in career, your first job, and you're in corporate and you're in these meetings and you're talking to your boss and things. So over time, you just kind of like try to adjust because of how we've been conditioned, and then over time, you kind of like you start to like, okay, wait a minute. So yeah.
Do you feel that having a podcast helped in any way to also share your identity, your true identity?
I definitely think it helps, because I have no one to answer to, right? Yeah. There's no one that judgment carries weight. It's me and my podcast. I get to decide how we hang out. And I think that's something that is important for my guests. I'm being who I am authentically, and that gives them the space and permission to show up as who they are. And so we're having candid conversations, right? It's like, it's okay to take the mask off, right? It's okay to drop the persona here. Let's just talk, as real individuals. So
how do you make your guest comfortable enough to be able to be themselves?
Yeah. So the first thing I do, when I ask them to come on, I mention, I love the work you're doing and this. I would love for you to tell your story, right? So they're already, it's already focused around them and who they are, what they're doing, right? And then we have a conversation before we record. So in that conversation, I'm building rapport. I'm asking them questions. I'm letting them know, hey, there's no script. There's no outline. There's no list of questions. We're going to touch on these points, and we kind of, share ideas back and forth. And then the conversation flows. So when it's time to record, we've already built that kind of
trust.
Yeah. So that they know, all right, I don't have to show up, so polished. It's Mel. It's going to be fine. I'm just going to show up and talk and be free. I think it takes away not having a script or a list of questions and things like that. I think takes away the pressure to,
totally
be perfect and spot on and on it.
Yeah.
It's like, let's just talk. Let's just have a conversation. And however it flows, it flows.
I totally understand, Melanie. When we first kind of thought about this podcast, I had like a structure. And some of the first episodes, I just follow this structure. And I have this and I, as you see, we're just having this conversation. And now I much prefer following the story and having a conversation than be like, okay, great. So next question.
Right.
So I think it's totally right. And having this, I didn't do a very good job for us today, doing the setup. But having this, initial conversation, not jumping in immediately to the chat, to the interview, I think helps a lot. just sometimes people are nervous. It's normal, right? Like they're about to start and they're nervous. They don't know what to expect.
Yeah. And also you could weed out people that are interested in wanting to be on there. And if they're not really a good fit for your audience or your mission, or, then in that initial conversation, you can kind of say, well, I don't know. And then give them opportunity to shift or adjust, or just tell them, I don't think this is a good fit. Maybe we could work together in a different way. Right. As opposed to we're just going to record. And now you have a whole podcast episode you recorded that doesn't align with your podcast. So
did you ever have to do that, to say no?
Yes, after? I did.
Was that awkward?
Not for me, but maybe for the other person.
Tell me that. How was that? So they joined and they were like, no.
I don't really, I don't want to get too deep into it, but to be honest, the podcast is centered around women of color. Right. And so it's a
white male.
It was a white man. And and I was, I told my husband, I was like, what, why does he, and he was like, no, don't even entertain it. And I was like, well, I don't know. And then my sister was like, well, see what he's saying, because he may bring a different perspective and something of value that we could use. Right. And I was like, you know what, that would be really powerful if we had, he didn't have anything that was going to resonate with my audience. He wanted to talk more about like applying for jobs, because he was a hiring manager for years, and he was wanting to tell people about what you should do to capture attention of hiring managers. And I'm like, that sounds great, but how is that specific to women of color looking to build their brand? Right. And I was fishing. I kept asking him questions to give him opportunity to connect the dots. Yeah. And it ended up being, I said, well, I really don't think this is going to be a good partnership. Yeah. Why don't you ponder on it some more, and we could talk again in the future if you have some ideas that would resonate with my audience. Because right now I'm not seeing the connection. So that was pretty.
This is really good. This is really good, because a lot of people, they would not have, I guess, the courage to say that, and it's important. It's your show, right? As you said, it's your show. You control it. You know what your listeners want, so it's important to say no sometimes. So I think it's really a good lesson. Shifting gears a little bit here, because I do want to introduce Pod Squeeze in the show. And it kind of an abrupt change, but tell me about your process of, once you record it, how do you publish it? How do you share your show? And as well, how this Pod Squeeze helping you there?
Yeah. So I love I don't even remember how I found it. I think it was a TikTok, or I don't remember, but I was like, oh yeah, we're going to use this. And, so basically what I do once the show is recorded, once the show is recorded, I grab it and I throw it into podcast. And so it's going through the raw recording before editing. So while it's doing that, I'm editing, so that by the time it's done, then, I'm able to, do things in between. And so once I go back and it's ready, which is relatively quick, to be honest. But when I go back, then I'm able to use the,
show notes.
Timestamps. Show notes. I definitely use the show notes. I definitely use the keywords or phrases or tags or whatnot. And then I use the other one, which is like the email, the newsletter.
The newsletter.
The newsletter. I use mainly those three things because I do email it out to my list every week. And so that gives me a great synopsis of the show, breaking down the points that we hit. So that's done. And then for the show notes, it's usually, and honestly, it's getting better, because I did take a 3-month break. Yeah, I took a 3-month break. And yesterday was my first episode back. And the show notes was spot on. I was like, I don't have to edit much of this at all. So I grabbed that and I put it in the show notes where, it shows up on Apple and Spotify or whatnot. Right. And then the tags, I always grab the tags. It's usually too many tags though. So I have to like go
Yeah.
through and like get rid of some, but I use the tags. And then
Where do you use the tags?
I don't know. I use Libsyn to distribute the show, and there's a thing for tags.
Okay.
And I just slap it in there. I don't know where the tags go. To be honest, I don't know what the tags go or what to do. But they ask for tags. Pod Squeeze gives me tags. So I just put the tags.
Let's do it. Exactly. Yeah. Why not? I mean, it's probably helping for, recommendation, search engine optimization.
Yeah, searching. So. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. And tell me about the newsletter. That's cool. So you send it to your listeners every time you release something? Is that it?
Yeah. Every week when a show goes live, I email my list and I say, whatever the topic was, and then I use the newsletter. Because what the newsletter does, it breaks down like the points, the main points that we hit throughout the show. Yeah. So it's really like a synopsis of the show without giving away too much. So it's kind of intriguing. And so I grab that and then, I send them the link to listen or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. And how do you collect your listeners' emails?
So I don't know if that's working very well, to be honest, but I have a button, like a subscribe button on my website, cool. Where, people can opt in to get those alerts. So,
and what tool do you use to send a newsletter? Is it MailChimp?
I'm using Kartra.
Kartra?
Yeah.
Okay. Never heard about it.
Oh, well, Kartra is awesome. I don't want to go too far off there, but it has tons of capability. So email marketing, landing page, calendar built in. It has cool. It's like everything. You could do webinars through Kartra.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will definitely add it to the show notes of the episode. Melanie, as we getting towards the end, I would love to ask you to again say the name of your episode and where can we find you? Like, what are your socials of the episode? Sorry, the name of the podcast. And then yeah.
I knew what you meant. The podcast name is Empowered Presence, and you can find me mainly on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram, but I don't really post there as much. But Melanie L. Denny is my name on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Just look for my little baby afro, and I'm jumping in my picture, so my arms are like next to me. And then I have, personal branding consultant for executives is my tagline. So look for me. I
will also link it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, follow me there. That's where I hang out primarily in terms of social media world.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Melanie. Once again, all the links will be in the show notes of this episode. Thanks for joining and sharing a little bit about your podcasting journey.
I appreciate this. Was a lot of fun. So thank you so much for having me.
This podcast is brought to you by Pod Squeeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.